So hi everyone, I'm Brandon Beck. I'm the CEO at Riot, and it is my pleasure to be here today talking to all you guys with kind of what's really my favorite topic and my favorite part of making video games, talking about people. You know, it's been a humbling 5 years since I started Riot Games with my co-founder Mark Merrill. And one thing I know for certain is that the reason I'm here standing before you guys today is because of our focus on people as a company, on identifying the right people to join our team, on empowering them to help us solve problems, and on providing them with an environment in which they can thrive. And if you come away with one core concept from this talk, it should be this: people are the most important part of any video game company. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. A lot of companies in our industry have repeatedly fallen into the trap of ascribing more value to other assets, like their brand and IP or their technology. And let's talk about tech for a second. I'd love to see a show of hands if you've ever spent any time staring at code in a text editor or in an IDE. Okay, a huge number of you guys. Then you know as well as I do that code has to be a living and breathing organism to stay relevant. Without the right people maintaining it and evolving it, it becomes rapidly obsolete. And what about brands? You know, brands are very powerful assets. But brands can evaporate even faster than technology if they're not in capable hands. Great people are the key to avoiding that dreaded failed sequel. Brand and technology don't have a ton of standalone value in our business. It's all about people. And great developers create the best brands in our business. The best brands are not licensed IPs, they're original IPs. And so if we buy into these arguments about people, then why as an industry are we underperforming adjacent industries in talent management? If any of you have ever competed with Google or with Facebook for talent, it's clear that our industry's view on compensation is very different. We don't pay as well as these guys do. As an industry, we don't invest as much per person in professional development and growth or in providing a phenomenal work environment. And why is that? If people are the most important asset in games, we shouldn't be underperforming our adjacent businesses. And we also have developed a little bit of a reputation for burnout, for overworking teams. And I don't mean to pick on these guys. This is just the most recent headline in a string of headlines that we face as an industry for a long period of time. And we often struggle to provide job security. And it sort of boggles the mind why, if you're going to cancel a project, why you'd say goodbye to all the people that you spent so much time and resources and money and training and recruiting and developing. And you know, an interesting challenge that we face as leaders in this industry is that in order to adequately appreciate talent, you have to be able to understand it. And if you live in a world of numbers all day, it's genuinely hard to quantify the value of a good team. In accounting, for example, there are standardized line items to account for the value of a company's technology or its brands or other assets. And these are governed in the US by the FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And they're a determinant of valuation and stock price of companies. But there's no standard accounting line item to ascribe value to a company's ability to attract, retain, and inspire people, which I would argue is precisely a game company's most important asset and most significant predictor of success. In fact, if all of Riot's 400 employees were to walk out the door tomorrow, we would have sort of a ghost town. Thank you, Halloween, for helping me make that point. You know, our balance sheet and financial statements would look exactly the same as they did yesterday, despite the fact that our company would just be a mere remnant of what it was. So maybe the accountants won't get it, but studio heads certainly should. And by the way, this is not a universal truth that can be applied to every company in the world. Games are one of the industries that is uniquely dependent on amazing talent. And it's hard to point to a company in any industry that wouldn't benefit from having amazing talent, but people are not always the key in every industry. And just to highlight that distinction, I want to provide a couple of examples. This is the M6 private toll road in the UK. It's one of the most used in Europe, and it provides a lot of people a lot of value. If this company were to have a management and employee exodus, it might be devastating in the short term, but there'd be a ton of residual value here. Another company, a new management team could join and resuscitate it, a new company could pick it up and staff it appropriately. But if you apply this analogy to Blizzard, the Blizzard team disappeared, you have a way more catastrophic situation that would be beyond repair. And some companies are driven by other hard assets. These are natural resources. This is a De Beers diamond mine. Again, not a company that most people would think of as people-driven. And some companies can rely on phenomenal brands, and some companies can rely on patents. And the relative importance of talent to a company or an industry is proportional to a large number of factors, some of which include your reliance on creativity, your reliance on technology innovation, and a company or an industry that is growing or is in a phase of change. And our industry is in a fundamental state of change, perhaps the most dynamic in its history. And companies are forced to adapt to a variety of completely new challenges. And I just want to talk about the nature of this disruption for a minute. It's being called the digital revolution, which I think is a sort of a silly misnomer. Our industry can't really be revolutionized by digital technology if it was founded on it. In fact, games were probably the first form of mainstream digital media. But what is changing our industry is the internet and the innovation surrounding it. And over the last 5 years, we've seen every other form of media transformed by the internet. We've seen the video landscape transformed. We've seen the music landscape transformed. We've seen print media transformed. And in our industry, it's led to the advent of some new platforms and new devices that have spawned massive incremental audience growth. But what about core games? How is it that core games have become the last fortified bastion of the shiny disk? Are we, as an industry, are we asleep at the wheel? Maybe, but I look at it as more of a classic John Woo-style Mexican standoff. You've got the retailers who are dependent on packaged goods, and you've got console manufacturers who are dependent on retailers, and you've got publishers who are dependent on both and have frankly built their competitive advantage through their retail distribution leverage. But regardless of these competing interests and of these complexities, by not embracing the internet as an industry, we are shortchanging our players, particularly our online players. And we founded Riot to specifically address some of the obvious pain points and missed opportunities that we felt as gamers. For one, hardcore gamers like us and like many of you in this audience are immensely social. This does not mean we want to play games on Facebook, but we do want connected experiences. And this is a shot of DreamHack, which is a LAN party that to this day draws thousands and thousands of players in the internet age to play together because they want that social experience. And we wanted easy online distribution. And we wanted flexible pricing options. And as players, if we are going to invest hundreds of hours playing a game, we want to make sure the developers are listening to us and that there's constant updates and engagement so that tuning and balancing is happening on a regular basis and that content is being refreshed. And the one constant, of course, is that none of the above really matters at all if you forget for even a second that premium, uncompromising quality comes first. And as a new company, we had a lot of challenges, a lot of growing pains as a startup and sort of the things that come along with being kind of an underdog. But we also had a few real advantages. With no packaged goods legacy whatsoever, we were free to wholeheartedly embrace these ideals that I talked about and attempt to address them as we built both development and publishing capabilities from scratch. And fortunately, the players responded very positively. And in order to navigate the challenges of our changing and tumultuous industry, Riot's secret weapon all along has been people. It's not our IP, it's not our tech, it's not our unconventional approach to distribution or pricing. It's people, plain and simple. And I want to share with you how we got to where we are today, a few stories about how we got to where we are today. But before I do, I want to highlight 3 key concepts that really describe the nature of the challenges that we've overcome. The first is unforeseen challenges. These are unknowns that we as game developers will inevitably face as a natural byproduct of R&D and the rapidly changing world around us. And the only certainty about unforeseen challenges is that we will face them. And it's how we respond to these challenges that really define our success. And there's only one countermeasure for these situations: resourceful, adaptive, tenacious problem solvers. The second concept is unsolved problems. With the rapid evolution of our industry and the medium, we, like many developers, have had to come up with solutions to problems that have not yet been solved. And these are problems with no playbook, no cheat sheet, no strategy guide. And if you're innovating, you're dealing with unsolved problems by definition. And these are choose-your-own-adventure books. And if anyone remembers these, and I think it's safe to say that our industry has pretty successfully obsolesced these with the phenomenal work of the BioWares and Bethesdas of the world. But nonetheless, they illustrate a third point, which is people are the dynamic force that drives decision-making across every aspect of your company. Development and publishing requires thousands of unique decisions. And there's no fixed process for exactly how to develop fun games or how to interact with your players or how to run a live service. So great decision-making requires great people. And the first story I'd like to share with you guys involves an unsolved design problem that led to an unforeseen challenge. In developing League of Legends, we felt that the key problem to solve, or one of the key problems to solve, was how to effectively match people into teams and match those teams against similarly skilled teams. In a competitive game, playing with players of appropriate skill is often the difference between fun and utter frustration. And there were 3 questions that we really had to answer. One was, how should matchmaking be done? 2 was, should we allow partial pre-made teams? Partial pre-made teams are teams that are, so our game is 5-on-5, and the idea was, can you queue with 2 other buddies and then be matched with 2 solo players or another group of 2 into a team of 5 against a team of 5 that was cobbled together in much the same way? And if so, how do you establish a value for everyone on the team's skill in combination with one another, plus modifiers for if they're queuing with a friend, they may have some intrinsic advantages, might be in the same room, etc. And so this was a fairly computational heavy problem. And then the third was, should player and team rating be visible? And this was going to be a make or break feature for us, and we had to nail it. In traditional matchmaking schemes used in games like chess or StarCraft, the systems essentially only really work with one-to-one matching. And given the team nature of our game, we felt it was essential to allow people to form groups of any number up to 5 to play together. And this ended up being extremely difficult to do well. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the last point was the most controversial, actually. Previous online games have chosen to display a person's rating. And we did a lot of research and testing and concluded that while it appealed to a vocal minority, the majority of players, despite saying they wanted this feature, actually preferred that their rating be hidden. And we ended up building a pretty effective solution for individual matchmaking internally. And we were ready to start taking on pre-made matchmaking. And our initial efforts were only moderately successful. And it became clear to us that we needed a different perspective on solving the problem and a different skill set to help engineer a solution. And there was really no off-the-shelf solution for this. This was an unsolved problem, and we needed to find an additional expert. But it wasn't clear who we should ask. Should we talk to a researcher, a matchmaking researcher at Microsoft Game Studios? Should we talk to an engineer, our engineering pals at Bungie or Blizzard? Should we talk to an eHarmony psychologist? They've done some pretty advanced matchmaking. Should we call a psychic? I don't know. And we racked our brains for people who had experience in sophisticated mathematical and statistical computation. And we ended up pulling in a friend of the company. He was a PhD in computational biology. And his thinking was radically different and compelling. He spent a week initially helping us engineer a series of computation techniques and algorithms that he leveraged in his own work. And we had a workable solution. And within a month, with further refinement of these techniques, we had dramatically refined our results. And we ended up solving the matchmaking problem. By solving it, we inadvertently ended up creating another one, certainly an unforeseen problem, that games were actually too fair. So close games are generally fun, but what players really remember, the lasting memories, are the outliers. When you dominate and crush, that massive 20-player kill streak, the glory moments. Effective matchmaking was actually minimizing these occurrences, and we had to do some subsequent tuning and balancing in-game, which ultimately led to the creation of an item category we coined snowball items. These were risky purchases that rewarded flawless execution with differential power growth, a risky way for players to take a crack at domination and glory. And the only way we were able to navigate these complex challenges was leaning on incredibly bright, curious problem solvers. These challenges require amazing people. The next story I'd like to share with you is also a tale of unforeseen challenges and unsolved problems. When we launched League of Legends, something was notably absent. For any of you playing the game back then, you may recall we launched without a functional store. And this was not by design. The store is a critical game feature for unlocking content as you progress in the game, and it's also where players can make real money purchases if they want. And so this not only had an adverse impact on gameplay, but it had a potential crippling financial impact on the company. The background was that as a small, scrappy startup, we decided it didn't make sense to build our own store when we were busy focusing on building great gameplay. And there were numerous companies that were providing this type of technology as a third-party solution. So we figured we would partner with one of those companies and rely on them for this key feature of our game, and it would almost certainly be better executed. After all, it was the sole focus of these companies. And in October of 2009, we were less than a month away from launching, we finished integrating our store and began to test for scale. And we allowed 300 simultaneous beta players to test it out, and it completely and utterly fell over. And as we investigated the source of the problem with our technology partner, the situation became even more grim. We scrambled our engineering teams. We did everything we could to repair the system, but it quickly became apparent it was unlikely to work. So we'd spent 3 years building a game. We had an otherwise successful launch planned, and we were stuck without a critical feature, which also happened to be our primary revenue mechanism. So we had three options. We could continue to resuscitate third-party tech, try to resuscitate it. We could panic, or we could try and assemble our own store tech from scratch. And we actually had a core group of engineers proactively come up with a suggestion that they could build a store internally during our efforts to help revive the third-party tech. This was a bottoms-up effort, and they brought the idea forward with a plan and a timeline to achieve it. And mind you, none of them had ever worked on a store before, and some of them hadn't even coded in the needed languages to assemble one. But because we kept the bar so high for the engineering team in terms of both aptitude and passion, which I'll elaborate on shortly, they found a way to make a fully functional store from scratch in less than 30 days, thanks to these qualities and thanks to some brute force. And Riot Games lived on to fight another day. And the third story I'd like to share is about a recent series of technology and community-related challenges that we had to navigate. We've been fortunate enough to experience significant month-over-month player growth since our challenging launch 2 years ago. And in June of this year, we came to a crossroads. We'd consistently found a way to keep growing our server capacity at the same pace as our user growth. And with our Season 1 finale in June of 2011, growth kicked into a much higher gear than we'd ever seen. And our player population exceeded our platform scale particularly in Europe, and we had to make a very difficult decision. We can either provide a suboptimal but unified experience for our European players, who at this point were often having to wait in a queue to sign into the server, and sometimes a long queue. Or we find a way to split and shard our EU service to provide significant additional capacity. And we decided on option 2. We knew it would be complicated to execute, but we ultimately were confident it would provide a better experience for our players. And the first challenge was finding a technology solution to split the server architecture in two. We then set out to solve the most complex of the challenges we encountered, which was providing a positive experience for our community. We spent a significant amount of effort analyzing locations, IPs, friends lists, and ultimately decided that the least disruptive way to split our servers was geographically into West and Nordic and East. And while our analysis showed that the methodology we'd chosen would have a minimal impact on the great majority of our players, the perception challenge was not insignificant. In order to tackle this, we embarked on perhaps the largest and most coordinated company-wide effort we'd ever engaged in. We had representatives from virtually every functional discipline in our company involved in the logistics, as well as a significant forum presence, comprehensive FAQs and news updates. And we even decided to cover the event. We built a television studio set with spare parts and produced a 17-hour live stream with representatives from each of the key disciplines involved in the split, providing information on the process itself, how it worked, and the progress we were making whilst the servers were taken down for final migration. And ultimately, I believe this was all made possible by a fundamental core cultural tenet we stand behind at Riot, which is we aspire to be the most player-centric games company possible. And we set out to solve this challenge for our users. When we set out to solve the challenge for our users, the team constantly asks this question: what is the right thing for the player? And often, the answer is far from the simplest or most straightforward solution. But ultimately, we found, per our earlier comment, that players want engaged developers. Players want to know that you care and that you are listening. And you cannot fake it. So you have to have, again, the right people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our philosophy around people and share a few lessons that we've learned along the way. The first is hire the right people, especially in leadership roles. This sounds obvious, but I cannot stress this point enough. Get the right people on the bus and you will crush. If you are a leader of all the things you can possibly allocate your time to, hiring the right people is almost always the fulcrum of greatest leverage in terms of effort and time versus reward over the long term, which means there should be very few activities that should be prioritized over talent acquisition. Great people also have this very cool multiplier, sort of force multiplier effect, especially the earlier you are in a company's life cycle and when you're creating the DNA of a team. Great people want to work with other great people, so talent naturally begets talent. And great people want to grow more quickly and are able to take on more responsibility. And great people require less overhead. And we've invested heavily as a company in terms of time and effort in building a selection and interview process that suits these specific needs, and it's provided a ton of leverage. The second concept is something we like to call hiring athletes. And I don't mean literally, but one of the patterns that we've observed is that the two greatest determinants of success at Riot have been aptitude and passion. Experience is great, but it's overrated. It's kind of like RBIs and Moneyball. Our industry puts a massive premium on experience, and every entry-level job description seems to require 2 years of game experience. So apparently, as an industry, we're moving way too fast to train anyone. This is a huge mistake. Imagine for a second you're a college football coach. And I love this image, but you're not on the cusp of having an aneurysm. You're calm and collected, and you're making a rational decision. and you're searching for your starting running back next year. And you've got two choices. One is a 4-star recruit from the Texas area. He's a high school superstar. He scored 37 touchdowns since his sophomore year. He runs a 4.5 40-yard dash and he's been playing football since he was 8 years old in Pop Warner. The other candidate is a smart and passionate kid from South Africa. He's coming through on a track scholarship. He's built like an NFL player, and he runs a 4.2 40. He's never played a day of football in his life, but he grew up playing some rugby, and he's really excited to learn. What do? You don't take the football player, you take the athlete. 6 months into your program, and he will have learned the offense, and he'll be running circles around the other guy. Translate this into games. We've got tons of candidates who've grown up as passionate gamers their whole lives. For whatever reason, they haven't considered gaming as a viable career option, but they have demonstrated aptitude and passion and excellence in whatever else it was that they did. Do not miss these guys. Make sure your system isn't arbitrarily filtering them out, and that you are casting the appropriate net. And the last thing I want to talk about is culture. Every company has a culture, and many consider it to be a key strategic advantage. Creating sustainable culture is not easy. Culture is a living and breathing and evolving idea that takes consistent effort over time to get right. And another facet of culture is that it needs to be specific and crisp and easy to understand. Who in this audience really likes black licorice? Raise your hand if you're like me and you really like black licorice. Okay, a fair amount of you guys. Who in this audience really dislikes black licorice? You freaking hate it. Wow, a lot of you guys. Who in this audience is like ambivalent about black licorice? Just a couple of you. Now, who in this audience is ambivalent around vanilla ice cream? You don't hate it, but you don't love it. It's not your favorite. A lot of you guys. The rest of you guys love vanilla ice cream? Raise your hand if you love vanilla ice cream. All right, all right. Well, the point is, as a culture, you don't want to be plain vanilla. And broad, catch-all, something for everyone culture will not really mean anything to anyone. You want to be black licorice, you want to be cilantro, you want to be Brussels sprouts, you want to be polarizing and take a freaking stand. And you'll be a magnet for cultural fits, and the rest will conveniently self-select out. I'm going to walk you through some examples of some different types of cultures. On that note, Marines have a very specific culture. They take pride in being the first to the fight. Their cultural values revolve around honor and courage and commitment. These are great values, particularly for military action, but they're not necessarily ideal for openness and transparency, and certainly don't encourage questioning orders. So everyone here is probably familiar with The Godfather. After all, it was a video game. This is a good representation of a hierarchical culture where loyalty and respect are paramount. It's great for organized crime. It's not great for fostering creativity. Glengarry Glen Ross is a great example of a high-pressure, intense sales culture that's focused on results. And results are an excellent core cultural value to strive for in video game development. But this level of pressure and intensity leaves little room for innovation and too strongly discourages taking risks. I think everyone knows what this culture is. Initech from Office Space, a perfect example of a bureaucratic culture, one where managers argue over the use of cover sheets and staplers. Bureaucracy stifles innovation, and it stifles self-direction, but it does make for great comedy. So to recap, it's important to ensure that your culture resonates with your people and that you're uncompromising in your pursuit of making it tangible and impactful. And lastly, pay attention to it. It is living and breathing, and it changes over time. So I'd like to leave you with one last message, and that's be practical. The real key to leveling up your talent pool is applying the same level of care, effort, and creativity that you do to business decisions, to people decisions. In fact, sometimes you'll even need to apply more. In video game development, people are the engine of our success. Thank you, guys.